Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else, including our phantasmal inner dogs, welcome to the Integral Stages Author Series. I'm Layman Pascal, a very smart, funny, nice, good boy, and today we're exploring collapsing spines, collapsing lives, and the art of going further in to go beyond. With author, artist, and audacious autoethnographer Jen Peer-Rich, whose debut memoir is called The Alchemy of Being a House, a memoir about the body that broke, the voice that barked, and the home that became us. That's a mouthful, and so is this. Therefore, hi, Jen. Good to see you again.
Hi, Layman. It's really good to be with you again. Really good. Thank you for having me.
Now, full disclosure, there's a warning at the beginning of this book that I want to let you know I've completely ignored because I am using this book for medical, legal, spiritual, and psychological advice.
Well, you experiment with that. You'll let me know how it goes.
That's right. I want to start this. You seem to be something like a transpersonal eco-psychologist with a circle of selves and animal familiars and a deep.
Layman.
Yes, what was the last thing you heard me say?
We were going into circle of selves and then you went out. I'm so sorry. I don't know if that was mine or what happened there.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Okay, we'll just roll with that. I think I wanted to say something like, okay, eco-psychology, circle of selves, animal familiars, deep relationship to trees. Is this a book of witchcraft?
I suppose you could say so. That's one perspective to take on it. There's many. This is definitely a multi-perspectival book that's very much grounded in the wisdom of our earth home and of our animal kinfolk, and because that is the wisdom that lives in me. So it's a memoir, so it's going to reflect those things about me. And I have been so lucky in my life to experience a lot of my healing in nature and through our animal kinfolk and through spirit messengers in the form of animals and animal selves. Yeah, it wouldn't have been a good memoir about me without including those various aspects of how the universe is alive inside of me.
Beautiful. I'm very much in favor of coherent multi-perspectival witchcraft.
I love
Um,
it.
let's see, memoirs. So obviously it seems like there's something therapeutic and developmental about writing a memoir, but going beyond the writing of it, why would someone care about someone else's literary self-portrait? What's in this book for someone like me who isn't you?
So yeah, so one of the things that's really important on my journey is to not be prescriptive in how I'm sharing my journey. Because as I experience it, my inner journey is highly, deeply personal, very specific to me. And so I think oftentimes the more you get in terms of information about that, the harder it can be. And the more prescriptive it is, the easier it is to ignore our own inner wisdom and the way things are shaking out specifically for us, because, all of that wisdom is clouding our interpretation of what's happening inside of our inner world. And so I love memoir so much because I am an educator. I do share information and I share a lot about my own healing journey, but I want to share it in a way that's just like, hey, I'm just a dude at the bus stop you happen to meet, and I'm sharing my life journey with you. And if any of this happens to be, relevant or helpful on your journey, yay. But also, this is just a map, it's not your inner terrain. And I really am sensitive to putting out quality information that isn't loaded with a lot of expectations for how your journey should look. Your journey should look however it should look for you. My journey is going to look like how it looked for me. So memoir is a particularly beautiful way of communicating that from a very first person, like an ontological testimony, like this is my life, this is like how the universe is coming through me, and maybe just by sharing with you how things have been for me, that maybe it might be helpful, but also we feel a little less alone. right? Because we need to hear each other's stories and how things are going down, especially in our inner world. Because that's not a place that we normally talk about. And so it felt really important to me to leverage memoir as a way to articulate my life journey in a way that wasn't being pathologizing of my story, that wasn't being prescriptive, just how it's been for me. That's all.
Yeah, I relate to a lot of that. I feel like there's a way of being careful about the prescriptive dimension so as to allow the idiosyncrasy of one's own story to help other people attune to the peculiarity of their own version.
Yes.
I've actually got a woman named Cheryl and I do a series of archiving people's lives, partly to preserve them, but partly because we're trying to catalyze an eldership culture in these overlapping developmental fields and networks. We also have this suspicion that the semi-mythologized, embedded tale of our epiphanies and our frailties, that's the ancient normal version of human wisdom communication. That's the basic pedagogy and maybe even the fundamental shape for subtle transmissions of various kinds. Um, do you feel like do you feel like the shape of the tale of your life can act as a transmitter of some kind?
I do. And it felt really important to me to share it in a way that was and this isn't something that originally intended to do, but as I got more in deeper into the alchemic transformation of the book, I realized one very important what goal that I had was to share it in a way that was deeply simple for any developmental level. Um, I've gone through graduate school and, I can talk theory and write. I'm great at scholarly writing, but there's a real gift and skill to being able to share a story in a way where the simplicity of it rings true to a variety of levels and perspectives, that wherever anyone is, they can enter into that space of sharing wisdom and receive whatever it is that they need to receive rather than what I necessarily even think they need to receive. And that tends to come through toward in a very simple package. you know Zen proverbs, Zen wisdom is a perfect example of that. And so initially in this book writing process, I had just come out of graduate school and done a lot of the autoethnography work, and I had taken the first draft of this book to a writers conference, and I got a lot of feedback that actually crushed my soul in a million pieces. And that's part of the alchemy of how this book arose to be what it is in this simple, more distilled form that it's in. But in this writers conference, the feedback I got is it's way too academic. And what I'm taking from that is that I still hadn't gotten to the point where I could share the wisdom in its most pure and simple way, that it could come through me. And I actually took a lot of the advice I got in that, and I took the book completely apart. And I gave it a new name. I even took the dog Ruth out of it because I was told that writing a book with a dog as a co-narrator wasn't marketable. And so I was second guessing my own creative instinct. And so it created a lot of tension in me. And thankfully, I have a lot of really positive, wonderful people around me who mirrored back to me, hey, wait, trust what you're doing. Trust the life of this book that is coming through. Trust that what you feel needs to be shared has merit, and come back to the soul of the book. And I did, but because I had taken it apart, I came back to it and reassembled it differently. And suddenly the wisdom was there in a way that it wasn't when I was writing it with a lot of frameworks and theories and ideas and just trying to get across way too much. they say when you know something, you can say it simply, right? When it's fully integrated and metabolized in my system, that I can finally say it simply. So that's the alchemic transformation of the book. Is that finally I came into a place where I could share the wisdom of my life in the way that you all are sharing wisdom stories in the most efficient and penetrative, say that 9 times, penetrating way possible to whoever is reading that book. That was my goal. I don't know. I think I did it. I don't know. I'm getting feedback. It's very interesting to see how different people are interpreting it, where people are getting, picking up wisdom, where people are not really vibing. It's really great. It's interesting to see how a creative project and that wisdom sharing is going to be interpreted by a reader.
There's something that strikes me about the kind of spiritual marketplace culture that we've created in the West over the last few decades or maybe a few centuries, where we're very attuned to people who are like, here is some wisdom. Oh, good. Right. And we're not necessarily practicing the skill, the ancient skill of picking it up from some dude at the bus stop, so to speak. Right. That you have to do some chewing and mining and recognizing of wisdom in its colloquial expression in order to really harvest the living form. And there's something you don't quite get when you get a book of wisdom explicitly labeled.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And just into that, you notice that on my cover, my name is just Jen Pure Rich, because I'm just trying to inhabit that, as in the best ways that I know symbolically, just to be like, look, this is just how it's been for me. Maybe it's helpful for you, maybe it's not. But if it is, I'm grateful for that, and grateful that the universe is using me as a portal to share, and especially multiplicity, because, you know, to me, that's like the jam. Like, that's where the universe is at. The universe is absolutely multiplistic and pluralistic and full of voices and layers and identities. And so, if I can just be a small, tiny portal through which that is coming through our collective, then I'm in. Like, that's good.
Now, I notice you're throwing the word alchemy around a lot as if we all know what we're talking about. What's your definition of alchemy?
I think in the most simple way that I understand it and have lived it, it is just turning the 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 tensions and difficulties and wounds of my life, and experiencing a process of transformation, and looking at it through this. I, in this book, initially very much framed it through the 7 stages of spiritual alchemy. But it's the transmutation of what is heavy and difficult to carry into what becomes wisdom and light, and what becomes easy to carry. And so what I tried to do was use, and I know alchemy is a loaded term. I mean, I had a lot of people around me like, "Whoa, Jen, you be careful." And I, certainly don't claim to, be an expert in alchemy, but I am an alchemist in how life has lived through me. My life has been alchemy from the get-go. And that's the clearest framework that I can use about this kind of spiraling transformation, this non-linear transformation, many layered transformations that I've been experiencing in my life, where I've taken the lead of my life, and I have, and through a variety of ways and people and things and experiences and practices and all of that, it has transformed into the gold that I am now sharing, which fundamentally is just that, I'm a house. And the more light and awareness I bring to my inner house, that's the gold in my book and in my journey, is that self-awareness that is so alive, and sharing that journey of going from a house that's not inhabited, that's the lead, to the gold of being a house that is lived in where my parts and selves and voices and patterns and all of it have a conscious awareness within me. That's the alchemic arc of the book and of my life. That lighting up my house inside is what saved my life in a lot of ways. And I know deeply what it is to live in a house that's not lit up, in a house that where no one's home. Or maybe I'm home just a little bit. I go check in there sometimes, but mostly I don't hang out there. And the transformative journey of really coming home inside and lighting this space up, and what that means and what that architecture of my inner world looks like. And just sharing that whole journey, lots of people are living inside. I just keep thinking about all these people who are living in that no one's home inside, and all their parts are jumping around, peeing on the floor, doing all kinds of things to get their attention. And all it would take is just walking into that inner space and lighting it up in whatever practice you choose with some type of light of awareness, so that the living house is lit up from within. That's really what I'm trying to get across here. And that is a house of multiplicity, and that house is participatory as an interface with the universe. It does not just end here. It continues, you and me, we're neighbors, our houses. Yeah, me and the universe, that's my bigger house. And the universe is experiencing itself through my house. So it's not just that I'm a living house, but I'm a participatory living house on every level, and especially with myself. So that's really what I'm trying to get across, and just share it as ordinary and simply as I can possibly share how that looks for me.
I like that it seems in reading it, there's an edifying quality, like I'm reading a success story of some kind, because all of the words you just said could be said as aspirational platitudes. But what I'm hearing is someone who's actually had some existential success, right? That their burdens are lighter, that there's light in their house, that their inner community is more recognized and more organized. So it's nice to hear that. It's nice to hear any story of a human being who got somewhere in the experience of being a human being.
Yes. We need success stories, yeah. Just to share, like, hey, I have had a tough life. I've been through some shit. And you too? Oh, yeah, because we can vibe, because, I can share how it was for me when I was in that place, and what the medicine was for me to find some relief from that painful place. I think sharing that is like that's the gold, and not from a place of saying how it is, again, coming back to that theme of not being prescriptive, just saying how it is, matter of factly.
My maternal grandmother was named Ruth, but
Oh,
Ruth is
yeah.
also the name of your co-narrator, the dog within. I'm curious what you make of the fact that your animal wisdom, animal intelligence is a dog and not, say, a dolphin or a panther or a gorilla. What is it about the dog that speaks to you as part of your connection to the non-human intelligence?
Well, I probably have an entire zoo of animal selves that live in me. Maybe an animal sanctuary is probably a better way to say it. Yeah, so Ruth was born during a time when I was going through treatment as a baby for stage 3 neuroblastoma. I had cancer as a baby. And there were a lot of times when I was going through that experience that I couldn't be held or touched. And so I was held and touched, I say, by the universe differently in the form of this self part that was born in that very traumatic experience as a dog self protector. Because for me, in my particular conditioning and cultural and linguistic footprint, dogs have always been protectors in my life, and spirit protectors and actual protectors. And so it makes good sense that for me, going through a very traumatic experience, that a protector self was born, and the pattern of that particular protector self is hypervigilance. That's the energy signature of that, of Ruth's very peculiar energy as it moves through me, is an energy of hypervigilance. And dogs are naturally very hypervigilant. I mean, if you just watch a dog, they're always, usually, unless they're super domesticated, they're pretty tuned into they're situationally aware of their environment. And that's how that energy has arrived through me as just a very sharp, very keen situational awareness to any situation, any room, anything I do. I'm highly tuned in. And that's a survival skill that arises through that pattern of energy that I needed to live. And so Ruth's voice, Ruth's energy as a protector, as an ally within me makes perfect sense to me. But for someone else, and I just got some feedback from someone who has a different animal with a different name, but that same arrival of energy through, and it doesn't have to be, selves aren't necessarily always born out of traumatic experiences. They can arise also through positive, happy, beautiful experiences too. But for me, it makes sense that this energy of hypervigilance arises through a dog part that's highly tuned into the world around me and is always going to be here and protect me. And by naming it, the reason naming it is so important, and actually getting into a very immediate and intimate relationship with that part, is because without that, before that, I was highly driven by that hypervigilant energy and I had no awareness of it. I just knew it was there. And it would come out in all kinds of just quirky and, unproductive ways. And I'd know it on the flip side, but I didn't have any anticipatory awareness of it. And so the more I name and shape and give voice and give a center role to that particular energy pattern within me, the more able I am to be in a conscious relationship with it. So when that energy comes forward, I'm like, oh, Ruth is here. What's happening? What is, and I can meet her, she can meet me, that energy, we meet each other, it's me meeting me in a much more conscious awareness of that pattern and energy. Just like meeting a friend at 7-Eleven for a Slurpee. Oh, we're all jacked up today, what's going on? What's happening in our inner world? Why is Ruth pacing? Well, maybe we need to go talk about it. Maybe we need to go inside and sit in the house for a minute and breathe about it and figure out what is activating this energy within me. And so I think that energy can be named or called anything. I think it's a trans species, transhuman. I don't think there are any limits to how the inner world needs to be named, categorized, understood, known, not known. I think, and this is why I love Vervaeke's work, particularly in serious play, because I think the most important part of serious play is happening in our inner world. And so there shouldn't be any limits to how those selves and parts arise. Maybe it's a balloon, maybe it's a deflated balloon whatever it is that needs to come through as a signature of energy that we can relate to, connect with, be in a relationship with, I think all bets are off for what it could possibly manifest as. Mine just happens to be Ruth. In my next book, that voice is baby Jenny, and I'll be looking at infant trauma. It's a baby, right? It can be anything.
There's something about this approach that I think addresses a common problem in developmentalism, which is the tendency for things to be too thin, too cognitive, too abstract. Because there's a lot of confidence people have in this general notion that, by witnessing my contents, I become a bigger and better subject by turning my previous subject into an object. You're like, okay, there's a plausibility to that story, but it's a very bloodless story. It doesn't involve a lot of our aspects. And the imaginative interaction and the characterizing of parts and the naming of parts, they boot up multiple intelligences within us so that that experience of enhancing our complexity by not being totally identified, but by being capable of being in relationship, it's a full spectrum experience. It's a multicolor experience rather than just a narrow, transparent watching of what's arising in myself.
Right. Yeah, how boring it is just to watch things happening in my mind. Yee. Right. I mean, you can do that. It's important. That's a important part of the developmental trajectory. But, once there's an awareness there, well, let's go play. I mean, I'm a house inside, I'm a living house. I'm in a neighborhood, houses around me, but there's a playground outside. And and this is what Jung was talking about in the active imagination, and being able to go into the imaginal realm and play there as a way of tapping into those spaces that we don't normally have access to. And so going from my inner house out to my playground to my transformation lab, where there's like dogs and ghosts and, I don't know what, spirals that go into weird places, whatever I can imagine, whatever I need in my particular healing journey, whatever messengers need to arrive, they're going to arrive through that imaginal realm on that playground where I'm able to have a universe of potentials to experiment. Maybe there are selves that don't want any attention in me, and don't like the light, and that I can experiment on that playground, do some serious play out there and just see if I take my flashlight and roll it around my house a couple times, if everything inside me goes, then I know that that's not something I need to do. And I take that knowledge and I integrate it. I bring it back take it from the playground into my house, and I integrate it and share it with my neighbors. Hey, I did that whole thing where I was like looking at myself really hard and shining flashlights up inside my house, and everything inside me says, I don't like it. I'm not coming out there to play with you if you keep shining lights like that. You got to come inside with a lot more love and gentleness, and maybe a little tiny light in your pocket that maybe might be needed, but you cannot come shine that light. Well, it just makes sense to me to experiment and imagine and use my imaginal. And my imaginal realm has always been my safe place. In my book, I talk about, as a young girl, crawling into my closet and making a hammock and imagining that, because I was so lonely, imagining that people were coming to visit me. It was like a hospital room, because that was the only place I ever felt really love and acceptance and that people cared. I wasn't getting that in my home. So I imagined that as a child. I was already using my imaginal realm to experiment within myself and find ways to love myself in my most wounded places. And that has just expanded as I've gotten older, to a now just a very rich, beautiful, interesting inner world full of lots of experimenting, lots of throwing spaghetti on the wall, lots of practices, all of it. I love all of it. You know, maybe this will work. Maybe my neighbor needs this particular practice or way of being inside, and I'm going to share it. You know, maybe it's not even for me, but just having a very alive, living house inside to me is the fullness of how the universe is expressing itself through me. And that's so cool. And it feels so good that this is the dialogue that I'm having within me, with between me, and far beyond me.
As someone who is so attuned to non-human intelligence, transhuman possibilities, ecosystems, plants and animals, what does it mean to be human? What's the specific significance of the human?
That's a good question. We have a variety of intelligences flowing through us. You know, I love being an animal. I'll just say that. I have a hard time trusting people who can't just say I'm an ordinary animal. That doesn't pass the sniff test to me. I love being an animal. I love the variety of animal intelligences that arrive through me. So I start there, that I'm a human animal, alive with a variety of instincts and wisdoms that are arriving through me directly from our earth home and our animal kinfolk, that I'm tuned in and alive to my animal intelligence on all the levels. I love that. That's beautiful. But also, and I don't want to say this, so there's something we humans do from the Enlightenment where we perceptually uplift ourselves and out of being human animals, and we're like, oh, because we're better. I feel like it's more of like a holonically nesting of intelligences, and that I begin as a human animal. This is just my ordinary experience, as I'm just born like any other animal. I live like it. I get hungry. I have urges. All of my animal parts are alive. But then also, I, as a human animal, have the capacity to start to expand my intelligences and perspectives and awareness in a way that a lot of my, and I don't know this, perhaps whales can tap into multiple intelligences. I don't know. Dolphins probably can. They're very smart beings. They probably can tap into multiple intelligences. But I know that what makes us as humans very, very special is our capacity to look at anything from a variety of perspectives, to have a nimbleness inside of our inner world, in have an awareness, a conscious awareness of our own minds, of our behavior, of our conditioning, our patterns. That is a beautiful expression of the human that I don't know if enough of us really appreciate. We just kind of do it and don't see how what a it's a gift, but it's also a responsibility, because it means that we then can hold the many truths and many perspectives and awarenesses that can lift us up. And the reason why it's easy to ignore that is because a lot of people aren't in place ready to take that responsibility. A lot of responsibility comes with being able to have multi-perspectival thinking, right? Because suddenly you become awake and aware that there are ways that we can tap in, things we can do, ways we can uplift. And it's much easier to keep our, heads in the ground and, stay numb and disassociated, detached, not in the multiplicity, all of that, than actually take the responsibility that arrives when you start to awaken to what's really happening and all the potentials that are available to us. So I think that the human is right now in the 2025 a species with tremendous gifts and potentials, almost at an adolescent point, a point of adolescence and adolescent development, where we stink, we're awkward, we're weird, we say weird things, we're learning, we're just not quite online yet, but we have glimpses of what we can be, and we're into the adult that I trust that we are growing into as a species, where we will take this capacity to have many perspectives and use that in generative ways to help people have healthy inner lives, help communities have healthy interactions, help each other grow. That is the adult I trust we're growing into, but we're just really stinky and awkward right now as a species.
So this book, this story is it's simultaneously the confession of a person who's stabilized in a certain basic feeling of belonging, and it's a journey to belong. And I'm curious how particular or universal that journey is. Like, I guess what I'm wondering is, you have a story where you can talk about certain physical and emotional traumas and insufficiencies, and then a journey to sort of correct that. Do you think everyone has that journey, or do you think it's particular to people who have a certain origin story? Or is everybody going to have basically that same journey and those same feelings, regardless of what their physical and emotional experience was?
Well, I think that's a great question. We are definitely transformative beings. Transformation is the jam. It's what's happening in the universe. Look around, it's happening everywhere. Everything's transforming, everything's changing. So that natural impulse of being a transformative person is alive in everybody. We're all gonna we born, we grow, we develop, we die. That's transformation. The that is alive and innate in everyone. And so being aligned with that transformation is just being aligned with the impulse of the universe. Some people have a natural kind of interest, instinct for, taste for transformation. And even to the point that the shadow will throw things into the mix as a way to encourage transformation. Probably very unconsciously, but that's what happens. Because there's something inside in that wisdom and intelligence of transformation that is hungry to transform and feels that that is a natural and good thing to do. Some people are a little slower on that journey and don't really like the transformative journey because it means a stripping away of identities and often the losing of illusions that are we have attachments to. And so they're like, but there's a slow transformation that happens. But for me, like I am a transformative being. Like I love it. I was born. I don't know if it was the radiation I had when I was a baby. I don't know what, but like transformation is what I am. It's what I do. And I deeply enjoy my own inner transformations. Um, And then as an aside, some of that comes from because my father was a very spiritually smart man conceptually, but he could never actualize that spiritual wisdom in a lived way. The transformations never really happened for him. And so that also may have spurred my great commitment to transforming in a way that it was like real for me. And it wasn't just conceptual ideas, it was the living experience coming through me, and that I was integrating these things. So that being a person hungry for transformation, some of us have that. Some of us just can't get enough of it and will always be a robustly transformative being. But for others, that's not really their journey. And they're like, why are you always changing so much? Why you care so much about processing? Or it's just not some people's journey, and that's okay too. Not everybody has to, be all up in the skirt of transformation and dancing, all night long. That's not everybody's journey, but it is mine. And I like to share that journey of transformation because I think it's helpful.
Yeah, I was thinking a little bit about your father because there's a lot of important women in the story, but there's also some interesting men. There's your father with his mixture of warmth and intelligence and his failures. There's Lamar, who makes your mother happy. There's Big Brother. There's others. Looking back on your experiences and observations and insights, Jen, what is a good man?
A good man, as I've experienced, is a man who shows up in any given moment in his full authentic self, however that looks, messy, strange, uh, awkward. Um, my dad was a very complex person. He had a lot of demons and hurt a lot of people, especially his family. But what he did for me was my mom really tuned out my creativity and couldn't really, like, in any way receive the fullness of my being. But my dad, for as messed up and drunk all the time and in jail all the time, he was the person in my life who allowed that creativity to shine, who really encouraged it. So here's this guy in this just really tragic package, but he loved me in a way that affirmed something very important to me. And that became a part of my inner house. That without that, messy, kind of muddy love. I mean, from an outside perspective, you're like, oh man, you were sitting on the his computer and playing on the computer. He just let you, and he was drunk a lot. Was that good? You shouldn't have been there. Well, maybe. Because really, that was the first moments of me expressing my creativity in a free and safe way with this dude who was drunk. It was my dad, and or he was trying to get sober or whatever he was going through the many years of my childhood. He tried in his own way to show up for me in a way that was authentic and yet messy at the same time. So he was being in that vein a good man in a messy package. And Lamar, my stepdad, was the most unassuming guy, but probably one of the most powerfully spiritually loving people I've ever known, because he loved me in a pure and unconditional way. He there wasn't any part of me he denied or didn't welcome or didn't honor. And I had some pretty messy parts of me, during especially in my 20s. And I never felt judgment from him. And that was the first time I'd ever felt that. I talk about in the book how he made me fruits. He loved to cook, and he made me fruit salad for the first time. And nobody in my family, my mom growing up, she never cooked. And here was this man gently peeling a banana and cutting pineapple in the most beautiful way. And I was like, wow, if he likes fruit, if he can be that nice to fruit, he probably could be nice to me, you know? And I never felt that kind of tenderness. And it was pouring through this man who was just so unassuming and just loving through fruit salad. And so I think that's the goodness in men and women, or however one identifies, that authentic love just rises up through, and whatever curious presentation it is, and it's trusted, whether it's through, letting someone be creative or fruit salad, that's just a deep expression of love coming through that. And I think men are deeply not just capable, but very powerfully oriented towards showing that kind of tenderness, because there's a real paradox there, like, if you're a guy, you have a lot of expectations about being strong and tough, and but if you then pour somebody a cup of tea as a man with just extreme love and tenderness and eye contact, and in just the most beautiful, graceful way, that's like, oof, that is transformative stuff. And it's vice versa too, you know I mean, I've done some physically powerful things in my broken body that would rival a lot what a lot of guys can do, right? And I'm a very feminine being, but I work and I'm tough. And showing that paradox that can live within one being as, beautiful and okay, I think is, yeah, just excellent. High top quality medicine right there.
Beautiful. I made a note of a couple of my favorite lines from this book. Um, so the first one is there's a moment where you say that your mother is in one of her paradoxical moods, which you characterize as being like love wrapped in adrenaline. Now that's beautiful. That could be in a song. What does love wrapped in adrenaline look like?
So going back to the our conversation earlier about hypervigilance, so hypervigilance doesn't just come to me through traumatic experience; it also comes through me through my family lines. Epigenetically, my grandmother was hypervigilant. My mother is hypervigilant. My brother and I are. We're all very highly situationally aware, very inwardly and externally attuned beings, and so. I think that my first drug that I was ever exposed to was and became addicted to was adrenaline cortisol, in a because I was born from a being that was amped up on stress hormones. And I too came out amped up in stress hormones. And so my mom's love was this strange mix between stress hormones and love in a messy package. Yeah. And I tried to show that tension between love that shows up, it's messy, but it's abrasive sometimes. It just says like the most hurtful things when you don't need it to be said, but it's still coming through in this package of love. My mom, just because my mom loves hard doesn't mean she wasn't loving. She was just loving in the package that she came in. And it doesn't look all warm and cuddly, but she showed up, again and again. And I showed up for her as best I could. And I was abrasive, and I was full of adrenaline too. Still love. Still love. Love is messy, It's a messy business.
Another line that I really liked was when your mother covers for you stealing her checks. And then she gives you what you describe as a verbal ass whooping that left bruises on your soul. And I was thinking back to being a rural kid myself and how often I thought I preferred to get physically roughed up by dad rather than getting emotionally and verbally assaulted by mom. Would you rather have gotten a physical ass whooping, or is there something when you look back about the soul bruising that helped you, that assisted you in becoming a better person?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it could have been any differently. But we definitely got some verbal ass whoopings and a lot. And I think it does attune my instrument in a particular way. I'm not scared of very many people. That's one outgrowth of that particular energy. I can take a lot, and I've integrated that. And I also have integrated that in a way that I myself, in my orientation, am very gentle as my antidote to that particular energy in how I speak inwardly and to others, because I know what it's like to use words. And I can, and my both my mom and my dad were very good at using words to just slice someone in such a way that you didn't even know you were cut until you were walking away and bleeding out. I know how to do that. I was raised that way. But I don't, that's not my heart. That's not my constitution. That's why it hurt me so bad, because I don't love like that. I don't want to love like that. I'm a being built for connection, and those are ways of disconnecting. And so those were, I was allergic to them. And that is why I'm so steadfast and committed to being a loving voice, not using that weapon against others. And in fact, doing the opposite, infusing the opposite. If my mom was giving me verbal ass whoopings, well, I'm going to go and give, I don't know, verbal upliftment. I'm going to go around and hug and say nice things to people, and remind people of how awesome they are, and how, as much as that's a weapon of, ass destruction, I can be a weapon of peace, an instrument of peace and love in the world. And that's important to me because I know how much it hurts. There's a saying, something like, if you only knew the violence it took to be this gentle, that's it. That energy that was alive in my grandmother and my mother, it ends with me. I'm the stopping point for that particular energy. I'm going to metabolize it on behalf of my family lines, and I'm going to inject as much love and safety and connection and realness as I can into our universe as a way of, as an offering on behalf of my family lines.
The third phrase that really stood out to me was when you, or I think maybe Ruth, says that the Anthropocene sounds like a fancy sandwich. Uh, and then I imagine you going into a fancy restaurant, ordering a sandwich. What's on the Anthropocene? If you order the Anthropocene, what's on that sandwich?
Yeah, well, definitely a lot of junk floating in the oceans. um, yeah, there's a lot of sadness on that sandwich. There's a lot of species suffering on that sandwich. Uh, there's a lot of missed opportunities on that sandwich. There's a lot of dominance on that sandwich, and how we as humans have become lost in our capacity for dominance and don't even notice it anymore. Don't even aren't aware of it. Just do it. It's just the natural way of being with each other, being within ourselves. To dominate is the norm. And so that Anthropocene sandwich is heavy and hard to eat. And but I think also that there's some potential baked in that sandwich. Otherwise, I would just stop talking about what I'm talking about and just, go lay out by my pool and let the world pass me by and just be like, nice life, thanks, universe. But I do believe very much that there is a lot of potential baked in that sandwich because I myself am the living example of how it looks to go from a very painful orientation to an inner world with a nice long track record of ways that I have hurt and sabotaged myself into a person that is really home inside myself and loving myself and bringing awareness and play and creativity to my inner world. And I'm doing that work. So if a dude like me at the bus stop can do it, everybody can do it. Or anybody who is inclined to do this work can do it. Um, if the desire is there. So um, I think the important thing about being at this edge of what could be disaster for our species, I hold on to the promise that we can come home within ourselves in a way that is real and alive, and that we're relating to ourselves with love and kindness, and that relays into an ethic of care of how we're relating to others around us. And that's a real organic thing that starts in every single person that is interested in doing this work, and then it expands outward, and that somehow we remember this larger house that we share. It's like this nesting thing. I'm a house, and then I'm in a house, and then there's a big house that we're all sharing. So maybe if we start coming home inside, we can start taking care of our larger earth home house that desperately needs us to come home inside in the same way as I'm pointing to about coming home in our inner world. Our earth home needs us to come home inside and be reciprocal again. Have a reciprocal relationship, a participatory relationship with our earth home where we're not just taking and not just dominating and not just blasting our trash out everywhere and taking every single habitat that belongs to, all of us just to build another, condo development. Maybe we could be a little bit more conscious and aware of those things. And that, I think, is our way out. I believe that self-awareness, if anything's going to save us as a species, it is going to be waking up inside and becoming aware of ourselves on the inside so that that can extend outward naturally.
This book is a like a meditation on deep homing, right? And there's the earth home, and there's becoming more at home in ourselves and as ourselves, and also this story of you as a person moving from place to place, all these places that sort of could be homes but aren't quite homes, and in the process starting to learn the skill of making cultivating home wherever you are, wherever you can. I'm curious about the signs of homeness. Like if an alien anthropologist came and they were looking at a house or an apartment or a witch's hut in the woods, how would they know it was a home? What would indicate that a space is operating as a home?
Well, there would be electricity, right? Some type of light source, whatever that is. Maybe it's strobe lights. It's a rave happening in that house, whatever, but there's going to be some lights, which is the awareness of that house. And there would be a sense of presence in that house. You would sense a presence. You know, you've probably seen come up on a house that hasn't been lived in. You know, houses die when they're not lived in. Quickly, they will deteriorate. And so a presence within the house, light, perhaps some good things cooking, some good things, you know, maybe some good soups are being made on the stove. Maybe there's a smell, a signature smell, you know, as you walk into somebody's house and there's just like a signature smell and you know it. You always go in that person's house and it always smells that way. Um, and I think for me, the most important thing in my house is my own tenderness and my own curiosity about what's happening inside. And that aligns with being present, that it's not just like, oh, I'm going to go hang out in my house now. I'm going to go look around. Maybe go down the spiraling staircase that leads to my heart and see what's alive there. Maybe go down into my gut. There's maybe some rooms in there that might need checking out. Maybe I hadn't ever checked out the deep room inside my gut ever. I never even been down there. So a house is made of presence, however that appears and comes through each individual, unique individual. It's that the lights are on. There's someone home. Yeah, that's what makes a house to me. How about you, Layman? What makes a house for you? There you are.
Yes, we had a freeze there for a second. Um, I think for most people, there's a sense of their story beginning in a primal scene, right? There's a where I'm from, whether that really seemed like the first home or it seemed like the first failure to be a home. Then there's this question about how do we balance the need to re-inspect that and re-explore that and re-encounter that with this other need to let go of it and not be obsessively referencing ourselves back to the first one. How do we get that balance right?
Well, it's a takes some experimentation, yeah. Um, when I had this breakdown experience 14 years ago, and that was really the spark of this book that happened 14 years ago. I had a big breakdown, messy in my backyard. I was just a total dark night of the soul. And through that summer, I awakened into an active, conscious relationship with my mind in a way I hadn't been before. And that started this journey of trying to understand what had happened to me over that summer. I really wanted to understand that transformative journey because I had lived it, but I didn't really understand it conceptually. So I went to Naropa, and that's where I got my master's degree, and that allowed me to have a very interesting kind of deeper awareness of what had happened when I had that breakdown and how the trees had been there for me and how that whole, you know, the feedback loops between us and nature that are very much alive, and that hadn't really actually lost my mind, that I just tapped into another level of awareness that's active and alive for all of us. And then I went on to do my PhD dissertation, and that's where I started doing autoethnography. And that is like literally the most focused, rigorous way to kind of examine yourself, and you have to show validity. So how do I show that how I'm looking at myself is valid, right? Like, so you have to develop all these models and ways of looking at yourself. And by the end of it, I had just looked at myself like to death. I had multiple meta awarenesses of myself from a lot of different theoretical perspectives and viewpoints. But that also was very almost kind of violent to my nervous system and to my inner world. And I found that parts of me that didn't weren't ready to come to the surface or weren't ready to be looked at went deeper. And I had to soften that stance towards myself over the years and kind of let go of that need to look, because really what I was replicating was that kind of fierce and focused inspection that was done to me when I was a child with cancer. That's what the doctors had done to me. And I actually ended up replicating that very kind of intense objectification of myself. And so I had to really find new ways of entering myself that were based not in a concentrated, forced excavation of my inner world, but in entering that was gentle and loving. And that is the more gentleness and curiosity and non-judgmental love that I bring to my inner world, well, then things just start coming up. The more my nervous system trusts me to do not what I think my parts and selves need, but what they actually need, then, things start bubbling up. But it's only through that portal of gentleness that arises for me. My inner world does not appreciate heavy flashlights inside. It's just not. I just am not wired that way. Somebody, for somebody else, a deep, hard looking and all of that, it could be very transformative, and it was for me in some ways. But I couldn't stay there. I had to find a much more loving orientation towards my inner world. And that has extrapolated to how my love shows up in the world because I'm kind on the inside, even to my most difficult parts, like the parts that are like, oh God, that is weird and, loud or whatever. And I find that in the world. And there's somebody that's doing like, kind of like how that part of me is. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm going to extend my love and kindness to this person because I know that lives inside me too. So it's an ethics of care that arises naturally through the more loving, tender relationship I'm having inside, and it comes out into the world. Yeah.
There's a lot of raw stuff in this book, handled with a lot of grace and coherence. I'm curious what type of content you had the most trouble including in all of its rich and honest detail.
Well, I'm not really ashamed of my life. I've had a lot of experiences. I talk about them in the book. I've had, problems with addiction, high risk behaviors, all kinds of things. I have lived a lot of very damaging patterns in my life. But I feel that I've shared it as honestly as possible that I can. I think one difficult thing for me was that in the beginning, I was writing about a time when I was a baby, and the stories about what happened during that time when the cancer was found, when my dad was drunk driving, and what happened specifically around that time. I had heard a story my whole life, my dad had a real Don Quixote complex, and he took a lot of credit for that accident my whole life. And then when I started doing autoethnography, I interviewed my mom for the first time, because she had never really talked about that time of my life because it was very painful. She was a young 20-year-old person married to a guy that was in and out of jail, and had wrecked the car with the kids in the car. My mom, that was a very traumatic time for my entire family. And so when my mom told the story, I was like, oh, well, this is really interesting. But what it really kind of sparked in me is like, why doesn't anybody know what happened to me? Right after that. Literally, that was my first reaction. And so it's been kind of a process of transmuting that to an awareness that, and the way I handled it in the book is I said, family lore differs after that. My dad said it happened this way. My mom told me, and it's the story I share, that she goes to the doctors find the cancer and she goes to the bank. I had never even heard that. So, sharing my mom's side in these moments when I'm a baby, and that felt important to me. And then also working out on the side why I was activated so much about the fact that nobody really knew exactly what had happened. Um, and the reason that had activated me is because I'm on the precipice of starting to write this next book about, and I'm starting to draft it now, about baby Jenny. And so it doesn't really matter what my mom's side of the story or my dad's side of the story is. What's important is baby Jenny's story. And so that was a real tension for me to try to share all, in any memoir, probably that is a challenge, is to share the story as authentically as I can, creatively, truthfully, recognizing that, sometimes in families there's different stories of what had happened, different truths that arise in traumatic experiences, and then trying to give that my best care in writing it. And then also using the tension of that to go deeper into my next creative project. Yeah.
Think you paint a very compelling and emotionally and in some ways culturally accessible picture with the book. One thing I noticed is that I didn't have a strong sense of the acoustics of the life, what was being heard, and then that led me to think about music. And I thought, well, if this book was being filmed, what would be on the soundtrack, given the time period and the place and who Jen is? What kind of music do you imagine being on your biographical soundtrack?
Oh, that's so awesome. What a great question. And I do share that, through the 80s, I was particularly into new wave music, The Cure, Depeche Mode. Um, and so that would definitely be on. And the interesting thing is about music, is that in the next book, in the Baby Jenny book, the patron saint of wounded infants is Saint Pat Benatar. And if you listen to the song Invincible, I propose that that is the soundtrack for wounded babies and wounded infants and infant trauma. And so I'm really excited about this, the creative and especially musical side of bringing that through, even more so in the next book. And the third book particularly because it's about the music that arises through chronic pain, the voices and parts and selves, that arise, as chronic pains, as a kind of music through the instrument, of my being. So I would propose that because I'm a disabled person and I live with chronic pain and disability, that the music that arises through me through chronic pain is very unique to me. It's a song that only my body can sing. And I know who all the musicians are inside of me. So I love that you brought forward, music. I would say that a lot of the alchemy of being a house, it happens, in the timeline of the 80s. And then in the next book, I'm really looking forward to leaning into music and resonance specifically as a way to creatively approach the relating and participatory relationship that's happening with our inner parts.
Yeah, you've mentioned the next book and Baby Jenny a few times, and I read on your website that you described this book as your debut memoir, which I thought was charmingly audacious. What can you tell us about the Circle of Selves trilogy? Well, why is it conceived as three books? Yeah, what's the idea behind having several?
Well, one of the things that I mentioned earlier that I had gone to the writers conference and I got a pretty harsh critique of that initial manuscript, and it's because it was really long too. And through my creative journey in the book, I realized that there were different books there, and that I was trying to untangle too many things, and that so I became then three books. The first setting up the inner world as a home, introducing Ruth as the protector of my home, talking about homes within homes through the story of my mom and her home and her being my first home, and trying to show that recursion of homes. Um, and and then the infant trauma part, the baby Jenny self, felt too additive for this book to be in its most distilled and condensed state. So when I pulled that out, I was like, oh, this is just another book. And then the same thing happened as I was trying to describe the relationship with chronic pain and how it lives in my body, and how it is to have a broken body and a broken spine and live in the world with that. So as I pulled those out, I was like, oh, this is my circle of selves. This is just not one book. This is the whole, like, and who knows who else is going to show up. I don't know. I mean, it's a creative journey. I mean, who knows is going to pop up. But I do know that this next book about infant trauma is it feels in the way that it was important for me to kind of depathologize and normalize hypervigilance as a kind of just unique intelligence that can get wonky and problematic, but it really is a superpower. This next book about baby Jenny is to point a finger at the way infant trauma is dismissed in our world. People think that because things happened to us before we're in the first year, that we don't remember, and and this is even, I'm starting to do my research with this. This is a little, but just as a tease to this, prior to 1985, it was the norm to do surgery and major procedures on infants without any type of anesthesia as we experience anesthesia today, because it was believed that anesthesia was more harmful for babies than not giving, or giving them. The norm was nitrous oxide, maybe morphine, but there were surgical procedures happening on infants without anesthesia as we experience it now. And the other basis for that was that the infant consciousness was not fully developed, and that's the same argument that's used towards animal consciousness, that they don't feel pain because their consciousness is not fully developed. Well, that same argument was made for babies. And so what happened, and especially to babies that had any type of, earaches, chronic earaches, babies with umbilical cords around their neck, lots of baby trauma happens. And because this idea that infant consciousness not fully developed is pervading, that traumatic experience of the baby is often dismissed. But what I know in my lived experience is that energy of that infant trauma of when I was strapped down and not being able to be held during those treatments or cut open without proper anesthesia, that wound lives in me. And this is just for me, it can live in all kinds of ways, but for me as rage. And it would pop up in my life in the most like unexpected and inappropriate times. And suddenly that rage would come out, and I didn't know what it was until I started to, move through the labyrinth of my inner world to trace and go back into what is that energy. And it led me right back to baby Jenny, furious, furious, because I think babies know that we have a birthright of being cared for and being protected and taken care of. And when that contract doesn't necessarily get exercised, that baby awareness, I mean, if you ever heard a baby scream, it is powerful. And so when a baby is wounded, that unresolved energy can end up becoming, maybe it's a perpetual sadness in someone's life, and they don't know why. Just a sadness that keeps popping back up. And it's that little baby self that had some terrible experience and needs some love, needs to be held, nurtured, eye contact. This, we go back into serious play here, but I'm gonna hold my baby Jenny and give her eye contact. Maybe Ruth will jump over and lick her face. Why not bring her that love? She's cool. I mean, that's infants that survive trauma like that are very powerful, grow up to be very powerful beings if that energy can be made conscious and recognized as a form of allyship on the inside.
When I was a kid, I didn't care very much about biographies and autobiographies and memoirs. But when I got a little bit older, I started to think that they're the primary literature of the species, right? Especially for education, because it shows you what a human life can be. Do you have any favorites? Like, what are your favorite life stories, whether it's movies or books or autobiography or biography? What did you like in terms of a life story?
My favorite memoir is Paul Kalanithe's When Breath Becomes Air. Um, that story of a being, this beautiful, intelligent man who, um, gosh, is a neuroscientist and then gets a brain tumor. And it's his dying journey. But and being written while in the dying process. To me, that is like a whole other level of raw kind of bravery. When all the chips are down, like literally down, going out. I got my exit card in my hand. I'm leaving, but can share so beautifully the lived experience of that. Um, it just moved me so deeply. But I have to tell you, I also just love and very much enjoy, and it's kind of like alongside of being a people watcher and a people observer, hearing ordinary stories. Just when you sit down with someone and then a door opens and you're suddenly hearing the ordinary lived experience of this being on the ground of life. And I think weirdly, every story I've ever heard lives inside me, becomes alive inside me. I remember it. I think I remember most stories, people share. It's like I have a kind of archive in me of living stories that people have shared with me, or like Paul's memoir that live inside me. or poetry that lives inside of me is very much alive. I'm a huge Mary Oliver lover. They become part of my house. They're like become an integrated, and that's probably why you love to absorb life stories because they're like pictures you hang on your wall and they're part of your house and you can look at that picture, and say, "Oh, I remember that story," and maybe sharing that story with someone else might be helpful someday, you know, or maybe sharing my story in this particular way might be helpful. But I do believe stories are incredibly important in storytelling and memoir biographies, just understanding how other people live as a kind of template, as a kind of easy access way to have options for how your life might look is really important. And we do that through storytelling.
Well, I'm out of questions. Is there anything else you wanted to say about this book, or you could ask some questions, or we could be done? How do you feel?
Well, I feel really grateful for this opportunity. I wonder if so I've shared because we share our interdependence, and I've shared my Ruth with you. I wonder if you could share with me and anyone listening a part of you that is an ally within you.
Hmm. Well, in some ways, it's not an animal ally, but I mentioned my grandmother, Ruth. So that's a nice jumping off point. I think about her a lot because, in many ways, I feel like the life that I'm living is an extension of one of her lives. It's something that, as a 50s North American housewife, she couldn't, with her particular baggage, couldn't really do, but she saw the possibility of thinking differently about religion and spirituality.
Mm.
She'd been a kind of in her middle-aged life, she was a sort of adventurer and got really into theosophy and smuggling and all kinds of strange things. She died when I was quite young. I often tell this story about her. I don't know the walks we went on. My mother tells me that she and I would go for walks. I must have been very little. I know that we were close. I don't really remember her death very clearly, but I remember knowing that she'd left me these books that were combinations of like meditation guides from the late 1800s and early 20th century, and a lot of books about the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians and the sort of collected occult history of the West. And that was an aspirational reading project for me as I learned to read. So when I dwell in these parts of myself, which are a huge percentage of the life that I live, I very much feel like I'm kind of extending Ruth's work. And I've also had these periodic experiences of um, brief visionary bursts of a bird-like creature that's her swooping toward me or saying that she's going to always be with me, which sometimes is very supportive and heartening and sometimes feels like a creepy old lady who smells like cigarettes clinging onto you. uh, but I think she's a perpetual interlocutor in my soul.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I love this synchronicity that we both have a Ruth alive inside of us as this, as an ally, as a protector, a guide, a wisdom keeper, as wisdom that we can extend out into the world. I think that's really cool. And I thank you for allowing your Ruth, to enter my house so that I too can extend her wisdom out into the world in my little way through my house.
Beautiful. Lovely to talk to you, Jen. I
So
love how
good.
much sensitivity and intelligence you bring to all of this. The book was a lot of fun, and I'm curious to see the next ones in the Circle of Selves trilogy.
Thanks, Layman. I'm really grateful for you and this opportunity to share. And everything you put out into our world is wonderful and needed and so very precious.